Hey everybody, welcome back to my shop. Today we're going to build this chest of drawers. I'm calling it a Lowboy-ish chest of drawers. Stick around with me and we'll get into the build. So as usual, we're going to begin with breaking down some lumber. We're going to be milling some alder as well as some walnut for this build. So I'm calling it a Lowboy-ish chest of drawers because it was inspired by a lowboy, and that's comes from one of my favorite styles of furniture. I'm a big fan of the traditional styles of furniture, some Queen Anne and the Chippendale, and some of those classic styles that are ornate. Those are some of my favorite styles of furniture and some of my favorite to build. And so as you've seen me working here, I've been working with some alder as well as some walnut. I glued up a couple of pieces of walnut that we'll make some feet out of. But we're going to begin here with building the end panels out of alder. And if you'll see that groove there, I have offset that to one side. And that will help me accommodate some trim later on in that panel. And it does pose a couple of challenges as we create this panel. One of those challenges here is creating those tenons on the rails to fit into that groove of the stiles. Because it's off-centered, I have to cut the narrow side. I cut that first and then readjust the dado blade to cut the thicker side. And here I'm cutting a bevel down the front stile of the panel. I'm going to wrap the grain around the front corner, and I don't do this very often. But in order to do that, I will use biscuits. I really enjoy using the biscuit joiner. It's kind of an underappreciated tool, I think, sometimes. But it's one of my favorite things to use. It helps to align things, especially in situations like this where you're trying to line up a miter. And there's a close-up. And then I'm going to go ahead and just, I'll use those biscuits and some glue. I'll put some glue in the slots of the biscuit as well as along that bevel. And we'll go ahead and put that together. And I'm just going to use that blue painter's tape. That does a pretty good job when you can mill your lumber straight and square. That blue painter's tape does pretty good because you don't need a lot of clamp pressure to pull that joint together. And so I will just go ahead and just use the tape as you see me doing here to hold that together, and we'll set those aside and let those dry. Now I'm back on this is the rear stile of this end panels, and I'm just cutting a rabbet out of the back edge, just using the regular blade in the table saw to do that, and that will accommodate the plywood back that we'll attach much later on in the video. And this was a glue up of some alder for the panels that will go in that frame. Just using my crosscut sled to cut those to size. And then I'm just trimming off those front stiles that I created and trimming those to length. Those are still a little bit long. I'll finish trimming those off a little bit later. And I did pre-finish the panel when I assembled that. So here I've got some plywood. We're going to build the carcass of our dresser, and we're going to build several web frames that we will use to build our skeleton. And so I'm just using the blade to run an edge. I built these web frames the same way I built the panel, just with the tongue and groove joint. I just go ahead and center that groove on these, and that simplifies the process of creating these frames. It's a little glue, and I'll check it for square and some clamps to hold that, and then I'll put a couple of 5/8" brads in those, and then I can take that out of the clamps. I don't have to tie those clamps up. And now we're going to go ahead and just run some dados on these frames, and that will be for assembling these together. And I went ahead and just assembled those using a little glue and brad nails. I do like to brad nail across the joint as well as I'll toenail it through the joint as well as through the end. I like to use plenty of brads just to make sure that we can hold those seams together, allow the glue to dry, and make this as strong as possible. And there is our completed frame. So here I am trimming those end panels to length again. You can see me cutting off those stiles. I'm going to use some glue and screws and I'll attach that to this frame. I find that there's not very much wood movement when those stiles and rails are so thin, and so I don't have any problem with that ever being an issue, and so with glue and screws it works very well. And so here I'm begin cutting pieces for the face frame of the case that will go between those two end panels that we've attached. And I'll just use the length of the case to mark that, and then we'll go ahead and cut that at the miter saw. And that's the nice tight fit that I'm looking for. So this was the bottom rail to the face frame, and I just needed to mark that to cut that notch out for the center drawer. That center drawer is a little larger, and so we just needed to cut that out, and I'll do that on the bandsaw. So here I've got a piece of poplar. I'm beginning to assemble the base for our chest of drawers. And I've got a little bit of a confession to make here. I created some feet that I have not posted in this video, but I will go ahead and post a video of how I made those feet. I didn't want this one to get too long, so in a minute here you're going to see these feet that we will be attaching. And I'm just using my tenoning jig and the table saw to create the mortise and tenon joints. And I just needed to notch out that bottom piece of the face frame, and that's what I did that with the table saw and the bandsaw. And there's those feet that I was talking about with that poplar frame, and those have been attached with mortise and tenon. And I'm cutting the notch out of the top edges of these feet, and that will accommodate some trim work that we do later on. And some more biscuits to align our pieces onto the face frame. I like to use biscuits on the face frame because you don't see any pin nails or anything like that with it. Works very well. And I'm just routing out this notch that for the bottom drawer, and that makes it just flush. And a little glue on the biscuits to put them in the slots, and then we'll attach all the face frame pieces. This is where having a lot of clamps is very helpful. So this is a piece of trim that will go along the base, and we've got that little curve cut out of it, and so I'm using that as a template. That is a piece of MDF that I made that template with, and I really like those flush trim bits to do that, and then a little coving bit to create a cove. And that was quite a large cove, so I did that. I think I actually did that in 3 passes. And then some sanding to touch up. And here I'm cutting the rabbet down the bottom of that piece, and that will just aid in assembling that trim to the base. And this is an apron that will go along the front of the base, and I'm cutting a rabbet out of that, and that too will just be for assembly purposes. Just using the bandsaw to cut out that shape, staying just outside the line. And I use my larger bandsaw to this. I don't very often set up my narrower blade in the big bandsaw, but I was doing enough of this cutting that I decided to use my bigger bandsaw. It's a much better saw. And then with the template and the flush trimming bit, we'll just cut that piece. And we'll just cut it to length with the miter saw. And that is how it attaches to the case. Nice tight fit. And this is a piece of apron that will go on the side. Just rabbiting out some pieces. Using my 10-inch jig, I thought was the best way to cut these pieces out like that. And this might look a little sketchy. I just wanted to cut these feet to the exact same length. I guess I don't know if I'd recommend that unless you're comfortable doing that. I've done that quite a bit, and so I feel comfortable making a cut like that. But if you don't, that's fine. There's other ways that can be done. And sew some glue in the mortise and tenons, and we'll assemble the base. Some clamps, and then I did go ahead and check that to make sure that was square, and we were good. And so I'm just doing a little round over on those apron pieces for the base, just to soften the edges. And that's how they will be on the case. And here I'm gluing on some little triangle pieces to the feet, and those are glued on over the base, or excuse me, over the apron. And we'll allow that glue to dry, and then we'll come back and finish shaping those. But in the meantime, we'll go ahead and work on that piece of trim that will go along the front. And that's where that will go. And as promised, we're back with some sanding blocks to shape those pieces, to blend those into the feet. Sanding blocks, files, a Dremel sometimes. I just use whatever I have to get those done. And here I'm just taping on some scrap plywood so that I don't damage the case. And I'm just using some 80 grit sandpaper on my random orbit sander, and we'll continue to shape those feet. And this really makes pretty quick work of it. And then we'll go back with some hand sanding with the block, and again, just whatever I have available, just whatever seems to work the best. Lots and lots of hand sanding. And now I'm just putting the chamfer on the bottom of those feet. That way, if this is ever pulled across a piece of carpet or a rug or anything, it won't snag. And we'll just go ahead and mark that trim for the miters on the corners, and we'll cut those on the miter saw. And some glue and some pin nails to hold that on. This is that corresponding piece of trim that will go down the side of the case, and I'm just using the spindle sander to create that cove on the back edge. And then some more hand sanding work to round that corner of that trim piece a little bit. And here's a couple of shots of our base with our completed trim. A little bit of sanding left to do on that, but for the most part that is completed. So here I've got some poplar that I'm using as drawer guides. We'll go ahead and cut those. We'll cut those to length with the miter saw and attach those to the case. And I'm just using screws. So here I've got another piece of alder, and I'm beginning to build our drawer boxes. And I'm beginning with the drawer front. I don't always do this. In fact, most of the time I do build my drawer boxes first. But I will not be applying a false front to a drawer box with this build. This drawer front will actually be part of the drawer box. And so I started with those in the process. And I've cut those to size, and I'm just cutting a rabbet around all four sides that will overlay the face frame. And just a quick look of how they will fit to the case. And here I've got some more poplar, and this is what I'll build the drawer boxes out of. Using the table saw and the miter saw, we'll just cut those to the proper lengths. And for this build, I got my Lee dovetail jig out. I haven't used my Lee jig in quite a while, so it took a little bit of time to set it up and remember how to use it. But I really love the versatility of these jigs. They allow you to really customize your dovetails and create quite a good dovetail joint. And on the back of the drawer box I used through dovetails, and on the front I used half-blind dovetails. And so I'm using that spacer stick to set those away, which will accommodate that 3/8 inch overlay of the drawer fronts. And now we have those drawer fronts in the jig, cutting the pins. And a test fit of the pieces together to see how our box looks. And we'll test fit that to the case. And as you can see, I had a little trouble with that one. We'll get back to that here in a little bit. So I'm back with another piece of walnut, working on some more trim pieces. And I'm just using the bandsaw to rough out some cuts. And this probably doesn't make a whole lot of sense with what I'm doing here, but it'll shortly make sense on what I'm making here. I actually have several trim pieces that are all connected together here, but it makes it easier to make some of the cuts before separating those. And here I'm separating those on the miter saw, and then shaping those a little bit with the spindle sander. And here's another little piece of trim, so I'm just doing a small round over. And then we'll cut those on the table saw. And over to the miter saw with a stick to hold it in place to cut them to length. And that's where they will go on the case. And there's the piece that we created. And so as you can see, we sometimes need to do additional sanding and filing and whatever we need to do to just make those fit nicely to the case. And so this is a piece of trim, as long as I was working with walnut, and this will be trim that will go around the end panels, the interior panels that we built. And so I just used the panel to mark it to length. I cut those miters on the miter saw, and there's all four pieces with a nice tight fit. And just brad nails to hold those in, pin nails, 23 gauge pin nails. I didn't use any glue on those, but I will use glue on these with some more pin nails, and then we'll apply that piece of trim as well. And I put in our drawer handles just to see how they would look. This is a groove I'm cutting on the drawer fronts, and I wrestled with this for a little bit to try and figure out how to do this. I wanted to be able to see the cut, but I did finally end up doing it this way, and this worked out really well. I just had some guidelines on the fence of the router table, and it did work out very well. And then I used a chisel just to square those corners up. And some more walnut to fill in those little grooves. And this walnut is only about 1/8 of an inch thick, probably not even quite that, maybe closer to a 1/16. Just a little bit of glue and the groove. Just push those in and let those dry. And so it was time to mill up a little more walnut. We're going to do a glue up for our top. So between the joiner and planer, we get those squared and flat. And then we'll glue those up. No biscuits on these, just glue. And now we're back to the drawer fronts. We're doing a round over on the front edge of those. That's a 1/4 inch round over, and we're leaving a little lip on there as well, just as a nice look. And then the groove for the drawer bottoms will go into the sides and the back. And we'll have to adjust that fence away from the blade about 3/8 of an inch to accommodate for that overlay. And we'll run that drawer bottom groove down the fronts. And some 1/4 inch plywood for the drawer bottoms. We'll go ahead and use some glue to assemble these boxes. These dovetail joints are very strong with a little bit of glue. And they stay together very well, so I just went ahead and glued those, and then I would just set them in the case to allow them to dry. And there's our drawers set in the case. Hey everybody, so got a little bit of an update for you here. I've been struggling with this top drawer for quite a while now. All my other drawers have turned out good. They're all pretty well sanded, a little bit of finish sanding to do and stuff on those. But I'm happy with these 4 down here, but this one is being ornery. So what we have is you can see on that corner there that it's just kind of not straight towards the face frame. And so I kind of been looking at that, trying to decide if I wanted to live with that or not. But it's also giving us this problem around the back of the case where this corner of the box is sticking up. I've made the drastic decision that I just cannot, it bothers me. So I'm going to build a whole new drawer. I'm going to build a new drawer front. I think the problem is this drawer front has just a slight twist and possibly a bow in it. But the twist is what's kind of causing that problem. And it's just slight. I've tried to measure and tried to do everything to see. I put winding sticks on there and everything looks pretty good to the eye, but it's obviously got some kind of a problem. So we're going to build a new drawer. And as promised, 1 new drawer. And that still needs some final sanding and stuff, but that fit much better. So at this point I'm going to use a little glue on the back of the case. We'll glue all of those pieces of the web frames, and we will go ahead and attach a 1/4 inch plywood back. A little glue and some staples. And this is that walnut glue up that we did for the top, and we'll go ahead and trim that to size. Mark that for length and cut that with the panel sled. And then I nipped those corners off with the saw, but I've got these little guide blocks that you can purchase and just using that router bit to round those corners a little bit. And now I'm making some trim that will go under the top, a piece of cove. We'll do that down each side of the board, and then we'll just cut that out on the table saw. And here I've got the case upside down again, and I'm just installing these guides that will keep the drawers from tipping out too far as you pull them out. And then back to work on the top. We're going to do a round over on the top side. I believe that's a 1/2 inch round over that I did on the top of the top panel. And then we flip that over and a 1/4 inch round over on the bottom side. And we'll make sure that's centered, and we'll go ahead and screw our case to the top. And I did elongate those grooves so that the top would be able to move with changes with moisture. And there's those trim pieces. Some more glue and some pin nails, and we'll attach those. And that glue only goes between the trim piece and the case. I do not glue across there for the top, because we do have a cross grain situation there. And then of course a little bit of sanding to round those corners, and we'll apply the rest of those trim pieces like we did around the base. And with that, the construction of our chest is complete. So for a finish, I went ahead and used Natura 1 coat on this project. And if you're not familiar with that, it is very much like Rubio Monocoat. Very similar. I've used both products. Both of them seem to work very well. I don't notice any change or differences between the two. The Natura is less expensive. It's cheaper to buy, and like I said, no substantial changes between or differences between the two, between that and the Rubio. So, you know, whichever one you want to use, I think you'd be happy with both products. I'll go ahead and apply those drawer handles. We'll slip those drawers back into the case. And with that, we have our finished chest of drawers. If you enjoyed this video, I'd appreciate if you'd like to like it and subscribe. That would be great. That helps me out. I do want to hopefully continue building these videos, and if it's something you enjoy and want to help me out, that'd be great, and I sincerely appreciate it. And thanks for watching my video.